Right now, you're hearing my voice. Your eyes are moving across these words, your muscles are keeping you upright, and your brain is busy making sense of all of it. But pause for a moment and imagine something different. Switch off your phone. Shut your eyes. Place yourself in a space that's completely dark and silent and commit to doing nothing at all. No planning your day. No browsing. No deliberate thinking. Just giving your brain a true break. We tend to assume that when we stop working, our brain stops too. We treat it like a computer. Close the apps, and the processor cools. But science has recently revealed that when you do absolutely nothing, your brain does the exact opposite. The instant you disconnect, a vast, hidden neural network inside your head bursts into intense activity. It turns out your brain is never more active, never more energy hungry, and never more enigmatic than when you are doing absolutely, totally nothing. Let's begin with a misconception. For nearly 100 years, neuroscientists thought the brain functioned like a simple supply and demand system. Solve a math problem, and the brain activates. Rest, and it shuts off. To test this, researchers in the 20th century used early brain scans. They'd place a volunteer in a scanner, ask them to memorize a list of words, and track the resulting brain activity. Then, as a baseline, they'd tell the volunteer, all right, now just relax. Empty your mind. Do nothing. They expected to see brain waves drop to a calm, quiet baseline. But without fail, the data came back messy. The scans showed massive, unexplainable spikes of energy all over the brain during rest. For decades, scientists simply threw this data away. They labeled it background noise. They assumed the volunteers were cheating, maybe secretly worrying about bills or thinking about dinner. They thought the noise was a glitch. They were wrong. In 2001, neuroscientist Dr. Marcus Raichle at Washington University School of Medicine decided to dig into that discarded data. He wanted to measure exactly how much energy the brain loses when a person stops doing tasks. What he found stunned the scientific community. When you sit in a dark room and do nothing, your brain's energy consumption drops by only a meager 5%. The other 95% of its enormous energy budget continues to burn at a staggering rate. Your brain, just 2% of your body weight yet consuming 20% of your energy, refuses to power down. Raichle realized that the background noise wasn't random at all. It was highly structured. It was a massive, interconnected system of brain regions firing in perfect harmony. He gave this hidden system a name now famous in neuroscience, the default mode network, or DMN, the dark energy of the brain. Think of your brain like a sprawling metropolis. When you're working, writing, or speaking, the city turns on bright streetlights in one specific neighborhood. But the moment you do nothing, those lights go off, and the entire underground power grid surges with millions of volts of dark energy. The default mode network is the brain's background software, and it is incredibly hungry. But what is it actually doing while you're just staring at a wall? The answer is something that defines who you are as a person. The DMN is essentially a time machine. When you do nothing, your brain immediately disengages from the present physical world. It stops observing the room around you. Instead, it enters a phase called stimulus-independent thought, what we commonly call daydreaming. But your daydreams aren't random noise. In 2007, Harvard psychologist Dr. Malia Mason published a study showing that the default mode network actively performs 3 highly complex tasks while you rest. First, it runs the autobiographical timeline. The DMN sifts through your past, grabbing random memories from a Tuesday afternoon 5 years ago, blending them with something someone said to you yesterday, and weaving them into a coherent narrative. It is literally constructing the story of you. Without this constant background work, your sense of identity would fall apart. Second, it runs social simulation. When you're doing nothing, your DMN starts simulating conversations. You replay an argument with your boss. You wonder what your friend meant by that odd look they gave you. The DMN activates the same brain regions used to read others' minds and emotions. It's a social simulator, constantly trying to predict how to navigate your relationships. And third, it handles perspective taking. It looks ahead, imagining future scenarios. What if I lose my job? What if I move to a new city? In other words, when you make your body stay still, your brain uses that exact window to build your past, simulate your present relationships, and map out your future. But here's where the science takes a darker, more unsettling turn. Because we live in a world where doing nothing has been all but eliminated. Think about your daily routine. For 300,000 years of human history, doing nothing was unavoidable. If you waited for a friend, you stood and looked at the trees. If you traveled by cart, you gazed at the horizon. If you woke in the middle of the night, you lay in the dark and reflected. Today, we've erased those empty gaps. The moment we face even a second of boredom, waiting in line, sitting on the toilet, riding an elevator, we reach into our pocket, pull out a glass slab, and flood our brain with external input. TikTok, Instagram, emails, news. You think you're relaxing. You think scrolling social media is doing nothing. But neuroscience proves the opposite. The instant you look at a screen, your brain registers a task. It has to process the blue light, read the text, analyze the faces, and react to the algorithm. The default mode network is instantly choked off. The underground power grid is shut down, and the brain switches back to its task-positive state. By filling every empty moment of our day with digital noise, we are running a massive, unprecedented biological experiment on our species. We are systematically starving the default mode network, and we're only beginning to see the consequences. In 2014, psychologist Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia conducted a disturbing experiment that sounds like a horror film. He placed ordinary volunteers alone in an empty, quiet room. No phones, no books, no screens, no distractions. He told them they simply had to sit there for 15 minutes and do nothing but think. But there was a twist. A small button on the desk would deliver a painful electric shock to their ankle if pressed. Before the experiment, the volunteers had sampled the shock and explicitly said they would pay to avoid it. Left alone in the silence, within just a few minutes, the isolation became unbearable. The sudden, intense activation of their default mode network without an external anchor drove them to distress. The results were astonishing. 67% of the men and 25% of the women chose to intentionally shock themselves rather than sit quietly with their own minds for 15 minutes. One man was so desperate for distraction that he shocked himself 190 times. Wilson concluded that the modern human mind finds its own internal processing so foreign, so unsettling, that it prefers physical pain over pure quiet thought. Just like John Calhoun's Universe 25, where unlimited comfort and lack of social friction eventually caused mice to lose their minds and stop functioning, our digital paradise is doing something similar to our brain's internal architecture. When you remove the friction of boredom, when you ensure your brain never has to sit in the quiet void of doing nothing, you don't just lose daydreams. You lose your ability to heal. Neuroscientists have recently found that the DMN is deeply tied to something called consolidation. When you learn a new skill or experience something emotional, that data sits in a fragile, temporary part of the brain called the hippocampus. It's only when you do nothing, when the DMN lights up, that the brain acts like a global moving company, copying those delicate experiences and storing them in the deep, permanent archives of your cerebral cortex. If you never give your brain empty spaces, you never fully consolidate your life. Your experiences stay fragmented. Your memories feel shallow. You become a passive consumer of information, unable to turn it into genuine wisdom. The beautiful ones. In Calhoun's mouse, Utopia looked physically flawless because they never fought or faced friction, but inside, they were dead. Today, we walk around with perfectly curated digital profiles, overflowing with external data while our internal time machines gather dust. We treat an empty afternoon or a quiet morning like wasted time. We treat boredom like a disease that needs a notification as a cure. But waking up at 300 a.m. and lying in the dark isn't a glitch. Standing in a room and staring out the window isn't a productivity failure. It's your brain doing the heaviest, most essential work of your life. It's stitching together your past, sorting through your trauma, simulating your social world, and figuring out who you want to be tomorrow. We have conquered the void. We've erased the darkness, the boredom, and the silence. We traded it all for a continuous, unending stream of pixels, and we called that progress. But the next time you have a free minute, try to resist the urge to reach into your pocket. Just sit there. Let the silence hit you. Let the discomfort wash over you. Your brain has an ancient, beautiful program waiting inside, ready to activate the moment you power down. Give it that switch.